The clatter of ceramic on formica was the soundtrack to Chloe's life. It was a rhythm of endless coffee refills, scraped plates, and the low, constant hum of conversation that filled Mel's diner every lunchtime. At 20, Chloe moved through the chaos with a practiced grace, her feet aching but her smile fixed in place. It was a cheap, plastic smile, the kind you wear when your tips determine whether you'll make rent this month. The air, thick with the smell of frying bacon and stale coffee, clung to her clothes and hair long after her shift ended, a permanent reminder of her place in the world. She navigated the narrow aisles between red vinyl booths, a full pot of coffee in one hand, her mind a million miles away. She thought about the art history textbook sitting on her small bedside table, its pages still crisp, a dream she was paying for one greasy breakfast platter at a time. Her life was a loop of work, study, and sleep, a monotonous cycle she desperately wanted to break. In the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl that nobody else wanted, sat Mr. Jean. He was there 3 times a week, always at noon, always alone. He never ordered the special. It was always black coffee and a bowl of soup, which he ate with a slow, deliberate precision that seemed out of place amidst the diner's frantic energy. He was a statue in a hurricane, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the faded work shirts and jeans of the other patrons. The other waitresses were afraid of him. They spoke in whispers about the sleek black cars that dropped him off, the silent, watchful men who sometimes accompanied him to the door but never came inside. They called him a gangster, a mob boss, something dangerous imported from a world of shadows and steel. Chloe just saw a lonely man who tipped well. He was quiet, polite, and never made a mess. To her, he was just booth 4, a predictable and profitable part of her Tuesday shift. Today, however, was different. The lunchtime rush had been brutal, a relentless wave of customers that left her breathless and dizzy. When it finally subsided, the diner fell into a temporary, exhausted lull. Chloe leaned against the counter, catching her breath, watching as Mr. Jean stood up from his booth. He placed a crisp $50 bill on the table, far more than his simple meal was worth, and gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He walked towards the door, his posture perfect, his presence commanding the space around him. And then he was gone. Chloe walked over to clear the table, her mind already on the next task, when she saw it. Lying on the red vinyl seat, almost hidden in the shadow, was a wallet. It was black leather, expensive and worn, soft to the touch. It was his. Her first instinct was simple, professional courtesy. She picked it up, intending to run outside and catch him before his car pulled away. But as she held the wallet, a strange, electric curiosity hummed through her. This was a piece of him, a glimpse into the life of the silent man from booth 4. She knew she shouldn't, but her fingers moved on their own, unlatching the simple silver clasp. It was wrong, a violation of privacy, but the mystery of the man was too compelling. She told herself she was just looking for a business card, an ID, something with a phone number, so she could call him. That was a lie, and she knew it. The wallet opened with a soft sigh of leather. Inside, it was organized, minimalist. A few high-limit credit cards, a driver's license with a face that was as stoic in the photo as it was in person, and a thick fold of cash. There was nothing personal, nothing to betray the man behind the myth. She felt a pang of disappointment. He was exactly as he appeared, a closed book. She was about to snap it shut when a small, rectangular edge caught her eye, tucked away in a hidden flap behind the credit card slots. It was old, the corners softened with time. Her fingers, now trembling slightly, worked it free. It was a photograph, black and white, its surface creased and faded. The world around her seemed to dissolve. The clatter of the diner, the smell of the grease, the ache in her feet, it all vanished. There, in her hand, was an image of a young woman, maybe no older than Chloe was now, laughing into the camera. Her hair was a cascade of beautiful, tight curls, her eyes sparkling with a light that Chloe had only ever seen in pictures. Her smile was wide and genuine, a beacon of pure, unadulterated joy. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat, a painful, sharp gasp. She knew that smile. She knew those eyes. She had spent her entire life looking at them in the single framed picture she kept on her nightstand. It was her mother. It was Sarah, 20 years old, vibrant, and alive in a way Chloe had never known her. But how?
Why?
Why was a photo of her long-dead mother, a woman who had spent her life cleaning houses and worrying about bills, hidden away in the wallet of a Korean Mafia boss? The question was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs and leaving her dizzy with confusion and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. This single, faded photograph had just shattered the foundations of her entire world. Her mind reeled, a frantic scramble of disbelief and desperate rationalization. It had to be a mistake. A coincidence. There must be thousands of women who looked like that, who had that same radiant smile. But the longer she stared, the more the small, specific details confirmed the impossible truth. A tiny mole just above her lip, the unique curve of her eyebrow, the way she held her head, tilted slightly to the side as if sharing a secret with the photographer. It was her. It was Sarah. Her co-worker, Brenda, a woman whose life was a tapestry of diner gossip, sidled up to her. "Find something good in there?" she asked with a wink, gesturing towards the wallet. Chloe flinched, snapping the wallet shut as if she'd been burned. She tucked the photo into her apron pocket, the crinkled paper a secret fire against her skin. "He just left it," Chloe mumbled, her voice sounding distant and strange to her own ears. "I was looking for an ID," Brenda shrugged, her attention already drifting to a customer waving an empty coffee cup. "Well, hurry up and find him. A guy like that, you don't want to be holding onto his stuff for long." Brenda's casual warning sent a shiver of real fear through Chloe. What was she doing? This man was dangerous. The stories, the whispers, they weren't just diner chatter. They were real warnings. And she was standing here, holding not only his wallet but a piece of a secret that connected him to the most important person in her life. She should put the photo back, return the wallet, and forget she ever saw it. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. Go back to her life of blissful, ignorant normalcy. But she couldn't. That photograph was a key, and it had just been slipped under the door of a room she never even knew existed. A room that held the truth about her mother. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. Mr. Jeans stood there, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't looking at the tables or the counter. He was looking directly at her. His gaze was intense, unblinking, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of the power he held. He hadn't come back for his wallet. He had come back for her. He walked towards her, his steps silent and measured. The remaining customers seemed to shrink in their seats, their conversations dying down. The air grew thick and heavy. Chloe's hand instinctively went to her apron pocket, her fingers closing around the fragile photograph. This was it. There was no backing out now. He stopped in front of her, so close she could see the fine silver threads in his otherwise immaculate black hair. He didn't look at the wallet in her hand. He looked at her face, his expression an unreadable mask of calm. "You have something of mine," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble that cut through the silence of the diner. It wasn't a question. Chloe's hand trembled as she held out the leather wallet. "You left this on the seat." He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. But his eyes didn't leave her face. It was as if he were searching for something, peeling back the layers of the tired waitress to see what lay beneath. The courage that propelled her to this moment felt like it was dissolving into pure, paralyzing fear. But then she felt the sharp corner of the photograph pressing into her palm through the thin fabric of her apron. It was an anchor, a reminder of what was at stake. The memory of her mother, not the tired, sad woman from her childhood, but the laughing girl in the picture, gave her strength. She pulled the photo from her pocket. The black and white image seemed to absorb all the light in the room. She held it up between them, her hand shaking so badly she was afraid she would drop it. "This was inside," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the cavernous silence. "I want to know where you got it." Mr. Jin's composure finally broke. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but a subtle, almost imperceptible change. A flicker in his dark eyes. A tightening of the muscles in his jaw. He looked from Chloe's face to the photograph, and for a fleeting second, she saw a ghost of an emotion she couldn't name. It looked like pain. It looked like loss. He stared at the picture of the smiling young woman for a long, silent moment. The diner held its breath. Brenda was frozen behind the counter, the coffee pot still in her hand. The cook peeked out from the kitchen window. Mr. Jean gently took the photograph from her fingers. He handled it with a reverence that stunned her, as if it were a sacred artifact. He traced the edge of the image with his thumb, his gaze lost in the past. Finally, he looked back at her. "This is not a conversation for this place," he said, his voice low and firm. He slipped the photo carefully back into his wallet. "My driver will be outside in 5 minutes. He will give you an address. Be there at 8 o'clock tonight. Come alone." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Chloe standing in the middle of the diner, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. The rest of her shift was a waking dream, a surreal fog of motion and sound that she moved through without truly participating in. She refilled coffees, took orders, and cleared plates, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in the infinite space between a question and its answer. The diner, once the solid, predictable center of her world, now felt like a flimsy stage set, and she was an actress who had forgotten all her lines. Every time the bell on the door chimed, her body tensed, half expecting to see Mr. Jean return, half afraid that he would. Brenda tried to ask what had happened, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and insatiable curiosity, but Chloe couldn't form the words. How could she explain that the quiet man from booth 4 might hold the key to her entire existence? How could she say that her mother, Sarah, a woman whose memory was a soft, faded quilt of loving but weary moments, might have lived a whole other life she knew nothing about? The questions churned within her, a relentless tide. Who was her mother, really? Not the woman who smelled of bleach and cheap laundry soap, who came home from her cleaning jobs with a permanent ache in her back. But the girl in the picture, the one with stars in her eyes. How did she know a man like Mr. Jean? A man who moved in a world of shadows, whose name was spoken in whispers. And why did he carry her picture, tucked away like a secret prayer, for all these years? Her mother had died when Chloe was 12, a sudden sickness that had stolen her away before Chloe had the chance to ask the real, grown-up questions. Her past was a collection of vague anecdotes about a tough childhood in a small town she'd been desperate to escape. There was never any mention of a man like Mr. Jean. There was no mention of danger, or wealth, or a life of such high contrast. As she wiped down the sticky Formica tables, her reflection stared back at her from the chrome napkin dispensers, a tired girl in a faded uniform, with her mother's eyes. It was a connection she had always cherished, but now it felt like a clue. Had her mother seen her own reflection in a place like this and dreamed of something more? Or had she fled from something more to find safety in a place like this? At precisely 5 o'clock, a sleek black sedan, the kind Chloe had only ever seen in movies, pulled up outside the diner. A man in a dark suit got out and stood by the door, his posture rigid, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. He didn't come in. He just waited. He was the driver. He was for her. Her shift was over. Her hands were shaking as she untied her apron and hung it on the hook in the back. The worn fabric felt like a costume she was shedding, leaving behind the role of Chloe the waitress. Tonight, she would just be Chloe, the daughter searching for the truth. And she was terrified of what she might find. The address wasn't for a restaurant or a public place. It was a skyscraper in the heart of the city's financial district, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that scraped the darkening sky. The lobby was a vast, cold expanse of marble and silence, manned by a security guard who looked more like a soldier. Chloe, in her simple jeans and worn-out sneakers, felt small and out of place, a dandelion seed blown into a sterile laboratory. She gave her name, and the guard nodded without looking at her, his eyes fixed on a bank of security monitors. "Top floor," he said, his voice flat and bored, as if women like her came to see men like Mr. Jean every day. The elevator ride was a silent, terrifying ascent. Her ears popped as the city lights spread out below her like a carpet of fallen stars. This was his world. A world of altitude and power. A world so far removed from the ground-level reality of her own life. The doors opened directly into a sprawling office. It was less of an office and more of a minimalist palace. One wall was a solid sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city. The furniture was sparse and elegant. A single, massive desk of dark, polished wood, 2 leather chairs, and nothing else. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal trinkets, no clutter. It was a space designed for control, not comfort. Mr. Jean was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the city he seemed to own. He wore the same immaculate suit, and in the dim, ambient light of the office, he looked less like a man and more like a silhouette cut from the night itself. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and even. He didn't turn around. Chloe's throat was dry. She stood awkwardly by the elevator doors, unsure of what to do, where to stand. The sheer scale of the room was intimidating, designed to make a person feel insignificant. "You said you had answers," she managed to say, her voice sounding thin and weak in the cavernous space. He finally turned to face her. His expression was just as guarded as it had been in the diner, but here, in his own territory, it seemed amplified. The mask was thicker, the walls around him higher. He gestured to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Please. Sit." Chloe walked across the polished floor, her footsteps echoing unnervingly. She sat on the edge of the leather chair, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. He remained standing, a deliberate choice that reinforced the power imbalance between them. He walked over to his desk, picked up the wallet, and took out the photograph. He laid it gently on the polished wood, pushing it across the vast surface towards her. The image of her smiling mother seemed impossibly small and fragile in the center of that enormous desk. It was an island of warmth in an ocean of cold, corporate power. He walked back to the window, putting the desk and the photograph between them. It felt like a barrier, or perhaps a bridge. He stared out at the city lights for a long moment, gathering his thoughts, before he finally began to speak. His voice was different now, stripped of the commanding tone he used in public. It was softer, laced with a melancholy that seemed to seep into the room. "Her name was Sarah," he began, and the way he said it, with such gentle reverence, sent a tremor through Chloe. He wasn't talking about a stranger. He was talking about someone he knew intimately. "But I never called her that. To me, she was always sunshine. It's what she was. Pure light. She could walk into a dark room and make it feel like noon in July." He paused, and Chloe could see his reflection in the dark glass, a man haunted by a memory. "She wasn't a cleaner. She wasn't a waitress. When I met her, she was a singer. The best I had ever heard. She had a voice that could break your heart and heal it all in the same song, a singer." The word hung in the air, completely alien to Chloe's understanding of her mother. Sarah had hummed sometimes, quiet, tuneless melodies while she washed dishes, but Chloe had never heard her truly sing. The idea of her mother on a stage, under lights, pouring her soul out to a crowd of strangers, was impossible to imagine. "She performed in a small, smoky jazz club downtown," Mr. Jean continued, his gaze still fixed on the past. "It was a place I frequented for business. A neutral ground. I went there to forget the world I lived in, and she was the reason I could. For 1 hour, when she sang, none of it mattered. The danger, the violence, the betrayals, it all just melted away." He turned from the window and looked directly at Chloe, his eyes boring into her. "I was a different man then. Younger. More reckless. I saw her, and I knew I had to have her in my life. I pursued her for months. She was cautious. She knew who I was, what I was. She knew the darkness that followed me. She was smart enough to be scared." He walked over to the desk but didn't sit. He leaned against it, crossing his arms, his posture creating a wall between them. "But there was a connection between us. Something undeniable. We were opposites who fit together perfectly. She was the light to my shadow. We fell in love.
deeply.
It was the kind of love that feels like it could change the world, but it was also the kind of love that could get you killed. The words hit Chloe like a physical force. In love, her mother and this man. This dangerous, powerful, cold man. It didn't make sense. And yet, as she looked at him, she saw the cracks in his armor, the deep, ancient pain in his eyes, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was telling the truth. Her life with me was complicated, Mr. Jean said, his voice dropping even lower, weighted with a shame that had clearly followed him for decades. I gave her everything she could ever want. A beautiful apartment, clothes, security. I thought that was enough. I thought I could build a golden cage and keep her safe within it. I was a fool. He pushed himself off the desk and began to pace slowly in front of the window, a caged tiger in his own sky-high sanctuary. My world is not a kind one. It is built on loyalty and betrayal, honor and violence. There are rules, and there are consequences. By being with me, Sarah became a part of that world, whether she wanted to or not. She became a target, a vulnerability my enemies could exploit. He stopped pacing and faced her again. There was a war brewing with a rival family. Things were becoming unstable, dangerous. I received threats. Not against me, against her. They sent me pictures of her walking down the street, leaving the club. They wanted me to know they could reach her anytime they wanted. They were going to use her to break me. Chloe felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She pictured her mother, young and vibrant, being watched, being hunted. The smiling girl in the photograph was suddenly cast in a dark, terrifying new light. I tried to protect her, Mr. Jean said, his voice raw with the agony of his failure. I put guards on her, moved her to a safer location. But it was no life for her. She was a bird, and I had locked her away. The light in her eyes began to fade. The music stopped. She wasn't sunshine anymore. She was just a prisoner of my love. He looked down at his hands, as if he could still see the blood on them. Then she told me she was pregnant. With you. The two words landed in the silent room with the force of a bomb.
With you.
Chloe's entire body went rigid. Her breath caught in her chest. All this time, she had carried a simple, uncomplicated story of her origins. A brief, forgettable relationship her mother had after leaving her small town, a man who didn't stick around. A story that was sad but simple. It was a lie. Her existence wasn't the product of a simple mistake. It was born in the heart of a secret war, a consequence of a love story between a jazz singer and a mob boss. That was when she made her choice, Mr. Jean said, his voice thick with emotion. She knew that as long as she was tied to me, you would never be safe. You would be born with a target on your back. You would be my daughter, and my enemies would see you as nothing more than leverage. A weapon to be used against me. He finally looked up, and for the first time, Chloe saw tears glistening in the powerful man's eyes.
She left.
One night, she just disappeared. She took nothing but the clothes she was wearing. She left me a note. It said that she was giving you the one thing I never could, a normal life, a chance to be free. She begged me not to look for her. She said if I truly loved her, I would let her go. And I did. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. The tears that had been welling in Chloe's eyes finally spilled over, tracing hot tracks down her cold cheeks. The story settled over her, a heavy blanket of truth that was both suffocating and strangely comforting. Her entire life, her mother's perpetual sadness had been a mystery, a quiet, sorrowful presence in their small apartment. Chloe had always assumed it was just the exhaustion of a hard life, the weight of poverty and single motherhood. But it wasn't. It was grief. It was the profound, unending heartbreak of a woman who had sacrificed the great love of her life to save her child. She had given up the music, the passion, the man she loved, and willingly stepped into a world of gray anonymity, all for Chloe. The tired woman who came home smelling of bleach wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was a warrior in disguise. Her exhaustion wasn't from mopping floors. It was from the 20-year battle of holding back a secret that could have destroyed them both. Chloe looked at Mr. Jean, and the fear she had felt was gone, replaced by a complex storm of emotions. She saw him not as a monster or a mafia boss, but as a man trapped in his own cage, a man who had been grieving the same loss for 2 decades. They were two strangers, from two completely different worlds, bound together by the love and sacrifice of the same woman. "I never stopped watching over you," Mr. Jean confessed, his voice cracking. "From a distance. I made sure you were safe, that you had what you needed, in ways you would never notice. An anonymous scholarship for your school, a landlord who suddenly lowered your rent, a hospital bill that was taken care of by a clerical error. It was all I could do. It was the only way I could keep my promise to her." The pieces of her life clicked into place, small moments of unexpected luck that had never made sense now revealing themselves as the secret interventions of a ghost. A ghost who was her father. The word was a foreign concept, a role in her life that had always been a blank space. Now, that space was filled by the imposing, heartbroken man standing before her. She understood now why he came to the diner. It wasn't for the soup. It was for her. It was his way of being close to the only piece of Sarah he had left in the world. He was watching his daughter grow up from the corner booth, a silent guardian she never knew she had. Chloe finally found her voice, though it was choked with tears. "She never told me," she whispered. "She never said a word. That was her final gift to you," Mr. Jean said softly. "Freedom. She didn't want you to be burdened by my name or my world. She wanted you to be Chloe. Just Chloe." He walked to the desk, picked up the faded photograph, and held it out to her.
"She would want you to have this."
"It was taken on our first date. It was the happiest I ever saw her." Chloe reached out with a trembling hand and took the photograph. Holding it now felt different. It was no longer just a picture of her mother. It was the prologue to her own story. It was a testament to a love so powerful it chose sacrifice over selfishness, a love that had shaped her entire existence without her even knowing it. She looked from the smiling face in the photo to the sad, weary face of the man in front of her. Her father. The words still felt clumsy on her tongue, an ill-fitting garment she wasn't sure how to wear. He was a stranger, a dangerous man from a world she wanted no part of. But he was also the man her mother had loved, the man who had grieved her for 20 years, the man who had protected her from the shadows her entire life. "What happens now?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. He saw the question for what it was. It wasn't just about the next 5 minutes. It was about the rest of her life. Did she step into his world? Did she accept the legacy of his name, with all the power and peril it entailed? Or did she walk away, holding on to the normal life her mother had sacrificed everything to give her? "That," Mr. Jean said, with a deep, profound sadness, "is your choice. It always has been. Your mother gave you freedom, and I will not be the one to take it away. You can walk out that door and never see me again. I will continue to watch over you from a distance, as I always have. Or you can choose to know me." To know your father, he offered her a future, but it was a double-edged sword. A life of wealth and connection, but one forever tied to the violence and darkness of his profession. He was offering her the golden cage he had once built for her mother. Chloe stood up, clutching the photograph to her chest. The answer felt both impossibly difficult and incredibly simple. She looked around the cold, sterile office, at the view of a city that looked beautiful but untouchable. This wasn't her world. It wasn't a world her mother would have wanted for her. Sarah hadn't run from this life just so her daughter could run back into it. She turned and walked towards the elevator, her steps more certain now. She paused at the door and looked back at him one last time. "Thank you," she said, and the words held a universe of meaning. "Thank you for the truth. Thank you for loving her. Thank you for letting her go.
Thank you for protecting me."
He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Acknowledgement of their shared loss, their shared connection, and their separate paths. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her off from his world, Chloe looked down at the photograph in her hand. Her mother was still smiling, her eyes full of light and hope. For the first time, Chloe didn't just see her mother's past, she saw her own future. A future her mother had paid for in tears. a future she was finally free to live. And as she descended back to the city streets, back to her own life, she knew she was no longer just a waitress. She was the daughter of a love story, the living legacy of a great sacrifice, and she was finally, truly free. What she would do with that freedom, she didn't know. But for the first time, the future felt less like a struggle and more like an open door.